Madam Victoria, we are sorry. One of the babies in your womb is not breathing. I understand this pregnancy came after years of trying, but you have to choose between living or saving the baby. We need to evacuate the dead baby immediately, and there's no guarantee the second one will survive the procedure. If you choose to allow the dead baby to grow along with the living baby, it may cause severe damages to your internal organs. Doctor, you cannot tell me that, I shouted. Do you know how many years it took me to conceive this baby? If you are not professional enough, then refer us to your senior colleagues, because I shall live to deliver my twin babies. I am very disappointed with this hospital. My name is Victoria. They called me the one left behind. Not to my face, of course. In our village, women speak in whispers that carry farther than shouts. I heard them at the market, their words sliding between the mangoes and cassava leaves. 38 and no husband. What man would want her now? I had stopped defending myself years ago. What could I say? That I had been too busy caring for my dying mother to notice the men who came calling in my 20s? That grief had stolen my early 30s, leaving me hollow as a gourd? They wouldn't understand. To them, I was simply the woman who had waited too long. My small house at the edge of town became my refuge. I filled it with books, with plants that bloomed despite the drought, with the quiet dignity of a life lived on my own terms. But at night, when the cicadas sang their ancient songs, loneliness would creep through my windows like smoke. I would lie awake, my hand reaching across the empty space beside me, wondering if this was all there would ever be. Then Samuel came to repair the school's roof. He was quiet in a way that felt intentional, not shy. While other men filled the air with boasts and laughter, Samuel worked with steady hands and spoke only when he had something worth saying. I first noticed him at the water pump, helping old Mama Casey carry her heavy bucket without being asked. No flourish, no expectation of praise, just kindness, simple as breathing. "You're the teacher," he said one afternoon, finding me grading papers under the acacia tree. It wasn't a question. "I am. My niece speaks of you, says you make the numbers dance." I smiled despite myself. Mathematics is just another language. Some children need help finding the rhythm. He nodded, considering this. I was never good with numbers. Better with my hands. He held them up, scarred, capable, honest hands. Would you teach me? I could fix that broken shutter on your classroom in exchange. That's how it began. Tuesday evenings, after the sun softened its grip on the earth, Samuel would come to my house. We'd sit at my small table, his large frame folded carefully into my wooden chair, and I'd watch him wrestle with multiplication tables like a man learning to pray in a new language. He never asked why I wasn't married, never mentioned children I didn't have. Instead, he brought me stories from his travels, small gifts that showed he paid attention, a special pencil from the capital, because I'd mentioned running low, honey from his sister's hives, because I'd coughed during our last lesson. 6 months later, he asked me to marry him, not with grand gestures or pretty speeches, but with the same quiet certainty he brought to everything. "I'm not a young man," he said. 43 next month, but I know what I want. I want to wake up next to you. I want to grow old, learning things I should have learned years ago, with you teaching me. If you'll have me." The wedding was small. My few true friends, his sister's family, the headmaster who had become like a father to me. I wore my mother's dress, altered to fit, and felt beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with youth. The whispers followed us, of course. "Finally," they said, "though what does she expect at her age?" But I didn't care. Not when Samuel held me that first night, tender and patient. Not when we planted our first garden together, his knowledge of soil meeting my stubborn optimism. Not when he'd wake early to make tea, bringing it to me in bed with the reverence of a man who couldn't believe his good fortune. For one perfect year, I had everything I'd stopped hoping for. Love that felt solid as earth. Laughter that filled the corners of our small home. A partner who saw me not as the one left behind, but as the one worth waiting for. But this joy would soon be tested in ways I never imagined. The children started calling me Auntie Books after I took over the community library. Samuel had suggested I'd a way to fill my days after I left teaching, unable to bear the constant reminder of other women's pregnancies, their swollen bellies like accusations in my classroom. The library was quieter, safer, or so I thought. But children have a way of finding you. They'd tumble in after school, dust on their feet and hunger in their eyes, not just for food, but for stories. I became their keeper of worlds. Every afternoon, I'd watch them sprawl across the worn carpet, lost in tales of brave princesses and clever rabbits, and feel my heart crack a little wider. "Auntie Books, will you read to us?" little Amara would ask, climbing into my lap with the confidence of the deeply loved. Her weight against my chest felt like holding water precious and impossible to keep. 3 years. That's how long Samuel and I had been trying. 3 years of hope, rising with the moon and falling with the blood. I knew the rhythm of disappointment by heart now, the tender breast that meant nothing, the nausea that was only anxiety, the prayers that echoed in an empty womb. My husband never complained, never asked why other women seemed to conceive by merely looking at their men while I remained hollow as a drum. But I saw it in his eyes when his sister visited with her new baby. The way his hands lingered when he held the child. The careful way he'd hand the baby back, like releasing a dove he'd caught by accident. The traditional healers came first, unbidden. Samuel's aunt brought one, a woman who smelled of herbs and certainty. She pressed her hands on my belly and frowned. "Something blocks the river," she said. "We must clear the path." I drank her bitter teas until my tongue forgot the taste of sweetness. I sat in steam baths that left me dizzy. I wore the charms she gave me until they turned my skin green. Nothing. The clinic doctor was gentler but no more helpful. "Sometimes these things take time," she said, though we both knew time was what I didn't have. 41, 42. Each birthday, another door closing. I threw myself into the library, reorganized every shelf, started reading programs, applied for grants to buy new books. If I couldn't nurture my own children, I would pour that love somewhere, anywhere, before it poisoned me from the inside. But the quiet moments still found me. Shelving picture books about families, watching mothers collect their children at closing time, their casual affection a knife between my ribs. The worst was when they complained about sleepless nights, about sticky hands, about never having time for themselves. I wanted to scream. I would take it all. The exhaustion, the mess, the thanklessness. Give me your burden. I'll carry it like a blessing. Samuel started working later, not avoiding me exactly, but avoiding the silence that had grown between us, heavy with unspoken blame. We still loved each other. I knew this, like I knew my own name. But love wasn't enough to fill the space where a child should be. One evening, I found myself alone in the library after hours, crying over a donated book about a rabbit who couldn't have babies. Even the children's stories mocked me now. I pressed my forehead against the cool wood of my desk and let the tears come. Salt water for a barren field. I would have been a good mother, I whispered to the empty room. The book said nothing back. I almost didn't notice when my period was late. Why would I? My body had become a liar, full of false promises. But after 2 weeks, then 3, something felt different. A fullness I couldn't name. A strange awareness of my own blood. My hands shook as I bought the test from the pharmacy 2 towns over, where no one knew my face. I couldn't bear their pity if it was negative. Again. And then, something unexpected happened. The test I never thought I would take changed everything. 2 pink lines. I stared at them until my eyes burned, certain they would fade like morning mist, but they remained, bold as a shout in church. I took 3 more tests, different brands, different times of day. Each one sang the same impossible song: pregnant, 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 asterisk. I didn't tell Samuel for 2 days. I held this secret like a firefly cupped in my palms, afraid that speaking it aloud would make it fly away. Instead, I walked through my life in a daze, smiled at the children in the library, made dinner, graded the community literacy tests, all while my hand kept finding my stomach, pressing gently, checking if the miracle was still there. When I finally told him, Samuel dropped the hammer he was holding. It hit his foot, but he didn't even flinch. "Are you sure?" "4 tests, sure." He crossed the room in 2 strides and fell to his knees, pressing his face against my belly like a man at prayer. "Hello," he whispered. "I'm your father. I've been waiting for you." The clinic doctor seemed unsurprised by my tears. "At your age, we'll monitor you closely," she said, spreading gel on my stomach for the ultrasound. "But everything looks—" "Oh." My heart stopped. "What? What's wrong?" She turned the screen toward us, her face unreadable. "Nothing's wrong. But there's more than one." The image swam before me, black and white swirls that meant nothing until she pointed. "Here, and here, and—" She paused, adjusting the wand, frowning. 3. "You're carrying triplets." Samuel's hand found mine and squeezed so hard I thought my bones might break. 3. 3 babies when I thought I'd never have one. I laughed, wild and uncontrolled, until I couldn't tell if I was laughing or sobbing. "Triplets at 42, the doctor said, scribbling notes. "We'll need to watch you very carefully. But right now, 2 are measuring perfectly." The word 2 didn't register at first. I was too drunk on joy, already imagining 3 sets of everything, 3 names, 3 first steps, 3 voices calling me Mama. "2?" Samuel asked, catching what I'd missed. The doctor's face shifted, professional sympathy sliding into place. She moved the wand again, more slowly this time. "I'm so sorry. The 3rd one. There's no heartbeat. It appears to have stopped developing about a week ago." The room tilted. How could I mourn a child I'd known about for 30 seconds? But I did. Oh, I did. One moment I had 3 babies. The next, I had 2 and a ghost. Will it hurt the others?" My voice sounded strange, like someone else was using my throat. The body usually reabsorbs the tissue. The other 2 should be fine. It's not uncommon with multiple pregnancies. Nature's way of— "Don't!" I couldn't hear about nature's ways. Not when nature had been so cruel to me already. The weeks that followed were a battlefield in my body. Joy and grief wrestled for space beneath my ribs. I'd wake at night, hand on my growing belly, trying to sense which movements belonged to the living and which spaces held the lost. Samuel would find me crying over baby clothes in the market, unable to explain that I was mourning the 3rd pair of tiny socks I'd never need. The community celebrated when news spread. Twins! A blessing! No one knew about the 3rd, the shadow baby I carried alongside the living. I smiled and accepted their prayers, their touches, their advice, while inside I felt split in 3. 1 part hoping, 1 part grieving, 1 part terrified of losing them all. At 16 weeks, during a routine scan, the doctor's face changed again. That careful expression I'd learned to fear. "There's an issue with one of the remaining twins. The development isn't optimal. We need to discuss your options." Options. Such a clean word for such an ugly choice. I was forced to make a decision I thought no mother would ever face. Selective reduction, the specialist said, the words sharp as broken glass in my mouth. We could try to save the healthy twin, but carrying both puts all three of you at severe risk. Your age, the stress on your body, the complications with Twin B. Twin B. They'd started calling my babies letters, as if names would make this harder. But I knew them already. The strong one who kicked at dawn. The quiet one who shifted only when Samuel sang. "What are her chances?" Samuel asked, his voice steady while mine had fled. "If she continues carrying both, maybe 30% she'll make it to viability. The risk of hemorrhage, preeclampsia." The doctor's list of horrors continued while I pressed my hands against my belly, feeling the flutter of life beneath my palms. 30%. I taught mathematics long enough to know those odds. But these weren't numbers on a board. These were my children. My impossible, long-awaited children. The news spread through our community like wildfire. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion about my body, my babies, my choice. "God gave you these children," Samuel's mother said, gripping my hands. "Who are we to question his plan? You must have faith." But the midwife who delivered half the village pulled me aside at the market. "I've seen women die trying to be heroes," she whispered. "Those babies need a mother more than you need to be a martyr." The church women brought prayers and judgment in equal measure. Some laid hands on my belly, commanding the weak twin to be strong. Others warned that interfering with God's will would curse the surviving child. Their certainty made my uncertainty feel like faithlessness. Samuel stopped sleeping. I'd find him in our small living room at 3 a.m., staring at the ultrasound pictures. "I can't lose you," he'd say when I joined him, "but I can't ask you to choose either." The healthy twin kicked constantly now, as if reminding me of what I had to lose. The struggling one moved less each day, visible on scans but fading like a song I could barely remember. The doctors showed me charts, statistics, projections. All I saw were 2 heartbeats on a screen, one strong, one faltering. My sister called from the capital. "You're not just choosing for yourself," she said. "What happens to Samuel if you die? What happens to the healthy baby? Sometimes love means letting go." But how could I let go of a child who was still fighting? How could I choose between my babies, like selecting fruit at the market? This one is good, this one is spoiled. I stopped going to the library. Couldn't bear the children's questions about my growing belly, their innocent excitement. "Will you read to your babies like you read to us, Auntie Books?" They'd ask, not knowing that I spent my nights reading medical journals instead of fairy tales, searching for miracles and survival statistics. The community split into camps, Team Faith and Team Wisdom, as if my womb had become a battlefield for their beliefs. Friends stopped speaking to each other over what I should do. The pastor preached about God's plan while looking directly at me. The women's group fragmented, some bringing me strengthening herbs, others whispering that I was selfish to risk leaving Samuel a widower. One night, Twin B stopped moving entirely for 6 hours. The rush to the hospital, the frantic ultrasound, the relief when we found the heartbeat, it broke something in me. I couldn't live on this knife's edge, balanced between hope and terror. "I'm already their mother," I told Samuel that night. "Both of them. And a mother protects her children even when it tears her apart." He held me while I made the call, held me while I scheduled the procedure, held me while I apologized to the baby who would never know how much I wanted them both. The morning of my appointment, I felt them both move one last time, together, like a goodbye. Or maybe that was just what I needed to believe. I did what I thought was right, but I didn't know then how much my life would change afterward. They wheeled me into surgery at dawn, when the world was still deciding whether to wake. I kissed Joy, my adopted daughter, Goodbye the night before, memorizing the weight of her in my arms. 22 months old, but still so small. Still fighting to catch up to a life that started too soon. We need to remove the scar tissue from your previous surgeries, the doctor had explained. The adhesions are causing dangerous blockages without intervention. She didn't finish, didn't need to. I'd become fluent in medical silence. Samuel held my hand until they made him let go. "Come back to us," he whispered. Simple words that carried the weight of everything. Our daughter who needed me. Our marriage that had become a shared vigil. Our stubborn refusal to let grief win. I woke to white walls and the absence of pain medication can't touch. Not the incision across my belly that was just flesh healing. This was deeper. They'd cut through the same muscles that had tried to hold my babies. Removed tissue that remembered them even when my arms couldn't. The surgery went well, the surgeon told Samuel, her voice carrying through my fog. We removed significant adhesions. She should recover fully. Fully, as if I could ever be full again when I'd been emptied so thoroughly. The physical healing followed its prescribed path. Medications on schedule. Walks down the hospital corridor, each step a small victory. The nurses praised my progress, not knowing that my body had become an expert at healing around absence. But at night, when the ward quieted and Samuel went home to Joy, who was with our Negbor, the ghosts found me. 3 babies who never breathed. The twins I'd carried together, the one I'd chosen to lose. They visited in dreams where my belly was round with promise instead of scarred with loss. I'd wake gasping, hands searching for a fullness that wasn't there, having been there for almost 2 days. The night nurse would check on me, adjust my IV, mistake my tears for pain. She wasn't wrong, exactly, just confused about the source. Samuel brought Joy to visit on day 3. She'd learned 5 new words while I was gone, he said proudly. But when she saw me, pale, connected to machines, unable to lift her, she screamed and buried her face in his chest. My daughter, afraid of me, another loss to add to my collection. She'll adjust, the nurses assured me. Children forget quickly. But I couldn't forget. Couldn't forget the weight of choosing between living and my baby. Couldn't forget that my body had failed every child I'd tried to carry, and now it was failing me too. The depression came like fog, slow and encompassing. I did my exercises, took my medications, smiled when the church women visited, but inside, I was drowning in a grief that had no acceptable outlet. How do you mourn children who were never born? How do you explain that your body feels like a graveyard? You need to focus on Joy, my sister said during one visit. She needs you strong. But strength felt impossible when I could barely lift my daughter. When the simplest tasks, bathing her, carrying her, playing on the floor, sent lightning through my healing abdomen. I watched Samuel take over my duties with competent hands while I became a spectator in my own life. The scar was ugly, a raised, angry line that joined its predecessors in mapping my failures across my skin. The doctor said it would fade with time. Everything fades with time, she promised, as if that were comfort instead of another loss. 6 weeks post-surgery, I stood before a small mirror, tracing the geography of grief on my body. Each scar a story, each story an ending. My body had become a monument to almost mother to 3, almost died trying, almost healed. Joy cried from her bed, her voice stronger now, demanding breakfast. I moved toward her slowly, carefully, still afraid something might tear. Samuel was already at work. It was just us, mother and daughter, survivor and survivor. I lifted her, ignoring the pull of healing tissue, and felt her settle against my chest. She was here, real, alive. It should have been enough. But just as I began to heal, fate struck again with a blow I never saw coming. They don't tell you that grief has a sound. Mine was the absence of crying in the recovery room. Not one baby's wail. Not two. Just the mechanical beep of monitors and the whisper of nurses who didn't know what to say to a woman who'd lost everything while trying to save something. The procedure had gone wrong. Catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. An infection neither predicted nor prevented. By the time they realized Twin A was in distress, it was too late. Emergency surgery. Hemorrhaging. Choices made by doctors while I floated in anesthesia's mercy, unaware my world was ending. I woke to Samuel's face, aged 10 years in 10 hours. He didn't need to speak. The emptiness in my body told me everything. Not the careful absence of one, but the howling void of both. "I'm sorry," he whispered over and over, as if he'd been the one to fail. The scar they left was angry and red, running hip to hip like a smile turned upside down. I couldn't look at it, couldn't touch it. Samuel would carefully clean and dress it, while I stared at the wall, counting cracks in the paint. 1, 2, 3. The number of babies I'd carried, the number I'd lost. The doctor explained about the hysterectomy in gentle terms. "To save your life?" she said. There was no choice. No choice. My life had become a series of no choices, each one stealing another piece of my future. I stopped eating. Food felt like betrayal. How could I nourish my body when it had failed to nourish my children? Samuel would bring soup, tea, anything, but I'd just stare at it until it grew cold. My milk came in anyway, cruel biology that didn't know there were no babies to feed. I wrapped myself tight, pressing against the ache, this final mockery of my body's confusion. The community that had been so vocal fell silent. What do you say to a woman who lost 3 babies trying to save one? They brought food we didn't eat, prayers I couldn't hear over the roaring in my head. Some still whispered, "God's punishment for interfering," they said. Others claimed, "I should be grateful to be alive," as if gratitude and grief couldn't exist in the same broken heart. I moved through days like swimming through honey. Thick, slow, suffocating. The library remained closed. I couldn't face those children, their bright eyes and endless questions. Couldn't sit in that space where I dreamed of reading to my own babies. Samuel built a workshop behind our house. The hammering gave rhythm to our silence. Bang, 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 like a heartbeat for our heartless home. He crafted beautiful things from broken wood, transformation I couldn't manage in myself. Joy, the little girl I had once held so close, was returned to the orphanage where I had adopted her. I couldn't care for her properly not when my own grief left me hollow, unable to nurture the love I had longed for. It felt like one more thing slipping through my fingers, like everything else I had lost. 3 months passed. The scar faded from red to pink to white, but the wound beneath festered. I found the ultrasound pictures hidden in Samuel's drawer and spent hours staring at those grainy images. 3 shadows that had lived inside me, 2 heartbeats that had stopped, 1 womb that would never carry life again. "Talk to me," Samuel begged one night, finding me on the floor of what would have been the nursery. We'd painted it yellow, neutral and hopeful. Now it mocked us with its emptiness. "What is there to say?" My voice came out rusty, unused. "I killed them all trying to save one." "Number." He pulled me against him, fierce and desperate. "Biology killed them. Infection killed them. Time killed them. Not you. Never you." But logic couldn't touch the guilt that lived in my bones. I'd made the choice. I'd scheduled the procedure. I'd laid on that table and let them try to take one to save another, and instead lost everything. The mathematics were simple. 3 babies, 0 survivors, 1 woman who would never be a mother. I started walking at night when sleep wouldn't come. Through the village, past the clinic, around the school where I'd once taught other people's children. Movement was the only thing that quieted the screaming in my head. One night, I found myself at the cemetery, standing before 3 small stones Samuel had placed there. No names. We'd never gotten that far. Just dates and the word beloved. I fell to my knees in the red dirt, finally letting the tears come, sobbing until I couldn't breathe, until the earth beneath me was mud. Just as I began to heal, fate struck again with a blow I never saw coming. Samuel died on a Tuesday. He'd kissed me goodbye at dawn, humming the song he always hummed while making tea. By noon, he was gone. The headmaster found him, collapsed beside the new bookshelf he was building for the school, hammer still in his hand, sawdust in his hair like premature snow. They said it was quick, an aneurysm that gave no warning, showed no mercy. One moment he was measuring wood, the next he was gone, between one heartbeat and none. I didn't believe them at first. Stood in my doorway while the headmaster stammered through words that made no sense. Samuel was 46. He was strong. He'd carried concrete blocks like they were pillows, fixed roofs in the scorching sun without complaint. Death was supposed to announce itself. Illness, age, something. Not this theft in broad daylight. Where is he? I heard myself ask, my voice strange and far away. They'd taken him to the clinic, the same clinic where I'd lost our babies. I walked there in my house slippers, forgetting shoes, forgetting everything except the need to prove them wrong. People tried to stop me, gentle hands and gentler words, but I pushed past them all. He looked like he was sleeping. That's what everyone says, but it was true. Samuel on the metal table, still in his work clothes, wood shavings caught in the creases. I touched his face, his hands, his chest, searching for the joke, the mistake, the moment when he'd open his eyes and laugh at my worry. "Wake up," I whispered, then louder, "Wake up, please. I can't do this without you." But Samuel had always been a man of his word, and death had claimed him completely. The funeral preparations moved around me like a river around a stone. His sister arrived wailing. The church women descended with their songs and their casseroles. Someone dressed me in black. Someone else answered the door. I sat in my chair, the one across from his empty chair, and tried to understand how the world kept spinning when mine had stopped. They buried him on Friday. The whole village came, filling the cemetery with their grief, but their tears felt distant, like rain on someone else's roof. They mourned a good man, a skilled carpenter, a faithful friend. I mourned the only person who knew how I took my tea, who understood my silences, who had held me through the loss of our children and promised we'd survive together. "He's with the babies now," someone whispered, meaning comfort. I wanted to scream. He was supposed to be with me. We were supposed to grow old, supposed to find new dreams after our old ones died. Not this. Never this. The house echoed with his absence. His tools waited in the workshop, patient as dogs for a master who wouldn't return. His clothes hung in the closet, still shaped by his body. His pillows still smelled like the coconut oil he used on his hair. I slept on the floor rather than face our bed alone. Days blurred into nights. I forgot to eat until the hunger pains became background noise. Forgot to bathe until Samuel's sister forced me into the tub. Forgot everything except the geography of loss. First my mother, then my babies, now my husband. Everyone I loved turned to memory. The sympathy visits dwindled. Life moved on for everyone else while I remained frozen, a woman made of grief and ghosts. The library stayed closed. Bills piled up. The garden Samuel had planted began to die, and I watched it happen with strange satisfaction. Finally, something else understood. 1 month after his death, I found his last gift. Hidden in his workshop, wrapped in brown paper, a small wooden box, intricate and perfect. Inside, a note in his careful handwriting. "For your treasures, my love. You are mine." I clutched that box and wailed like the wind through empty houses, screamed until my throat went raw, beat my fists against the floor until they bled. This wasn't healing. This was drowning in reverse. Water filling my lungs drop by drop until breathing became impossible. But my grief was only the beginning of a much darker journey. The accusations started small, whispers that slithered through funeral gatherings like snakes in grass. Samuel's mother, who had pressed my hands and called me daughter just weeks before, now avoided my eyes at the market. His sister, who had wailed beside me at his grave, began counting his tools when she visited. "We need to talk about Samuel's things," his eldest brother announced, arriving with 3 uncles and the village chief as witness. They sat in my living room, Samuel's living room, like judges at a trial I didn't know I was attending. "What about them?" I asked, still naive enough to think this was about preservation, not possession. "You killed him." His mother spoke from the doorway, her voice flat as beaten metal. "The stress of your barrenness, the hospital bills, the shame you brought on our family." His heart couldn't take it. The words hit like physical blows. I stared at this woman who had celebrated our wedding, who had brought me strengthening herbs during pregnancy, who had held me when I lost everything. "You think 3 babies dead. Now, my son, you're cursed." She spat the words like bitter seeds. "Everything you touch dies." His brother cleared his throat, producing papers I didn't remember signing. According to custom, Samuel's property returns to his family. The house was built on our father's land. The workshop, the tools, everything he made, it belongs to us. We were married. I'm his widow. A barren widow who gave him nothing but grief. The sister who had helped plan my wedding now looked at me with naked contempt. No children to carry his name. No legacy, but debt and death. The chief shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Custom was custom. A childless widow had few rights, especially one blamed for her husband's death. The papers they showed were legitimate. The land deed in his father's name, never transferred. I trusted Samuel to handle such things. Trust seemed like another word for stupidity now. "You have 1 week," his brother said, standing. "Take your personal belongings. Nothing else." They filed out, leaving me in what was no longer my home. I sat among Samuel's things, our things, and tried to understand how grief had transformed into greed so quickly. How the family that had embraced me could discard me like fruit gone bad. His mother returned the next day with 2 younger women. They walked through my house like buyers at market, touching everything, claiming everything. "This pot was my mother's," she lied, taking the one I'd bought with my first teaching salary. "These curtains came from our family, the ones I'd sewn myself," pricking my fingers bloody to finish before our wedding. I fought at first, showed receipts, argued ownership, tried to shame them with memories of Samuel's love for me. But shame requires conscience, and theirs had been buried with their son. They took his clothes, still carrying his scent, his tools, still marked by his hands, even the wooden box he'd made me, his last gift. "That's mine," I said, grabbing for it. His sister yanked it back. "Nothing here is yours. You're lucky we're letting you leave with anything." The village watched, of course, some with pity, some with satisfaction. The barren woman getting what she deserved, the outsider being cast out. A few tried to help. The headmaster offered storage space, the midwife slipped me money, but most stayed silent. Custom protected them today. Who knew when they might need its shelter tomorrow? On the 7th day, I packed my single suitcase. Clothes, my mother's jewelry, the ultrasound pictures I hid between book pages. A shirt of Samuel's I managed to steal back, pressed against my face one last time before folding it small. My sister came with a borrowed truck. She said nothing about my swollen eyes, my shaking hands, the way I looked back at the house where I'd been happy, then utterly destroyed. His family stood in the yard, already planning renovations, erasures of my existence. "Drive," I whispered. As we left, I saw them burning my garden. The smoke rose black against the morning sky, carrying away the last living things I'd touched. I had nothing left. No home, no future, but I couldn't just stay down. I had to rise again. My sister's spare room smelled like old newspapers and pity. For 3 weeks, I lay on a thin mattress, staring at water stains on the ceiling that looked like clouds if I squinted. Grief had hollowed me out so thoroughly that I felt translucent, like holding me up to light would show nothing inside but empty space. "There's a position," my sister said one morning, setting tea beside my bed with careful normalcy. "The literacy center in McKinney District. They need someone who can teach adults. The pay isn't much, but..." "I'll take it." She blinked at my first words in days. "You don't even know the details." "I'll take it," I repeated, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. I couldn't live as a ghost in her spare room forever. Ghosts didn't need food, didn't burden working sisters, didn't take up space meant for the living. The interview was 40 minutes by bush taxi from my sister's house. I wore my only good dress, the one that had survived the pillaging, and practiced answers to questions they might ask. "Why did you leave your last position?" "My husband died and his family took everything." "Why should we hire you?" "Because I have nothing left to lose." The director, Mrs. Akabe, had eyes that missed nothing. She looked at my careful posture, my hollow cheeks, the way my hands trembled slightly when I signed the application. "You taught at the village school for 15 years?" "Yes." "And the community library?" "I ran it for 3 years, until my body betrayed me, until loss became my only literacy." She studied my face. "We serve the forgotten here. Market women who never learned letters. Farmers who sign with thumbprints. People starting over." A pause. "People like you." The whispers started my first day. They always did. "That's her," the receptionist murmured to the cleaner. "The one whose babies all died. Husband too. They say she's cursed." I pretended not to hear, focusing instead on my classroom. 20 wooden desks, a chalkboard with more cracks than wall, boxes of donated books that smelled like possibility. I wrote my name, in large letters. Mrs. Nalini. Not my husband's name anymore, that had been taken too. Just mine, reclaimed from the time before. My first students arrived suspicious and proud, adults who'd spent lifetimes hiding their inability to read. Market women who memorized prices because numbers on paper meant nothing. Grandfathers who'd never signed their names. A young mother who wanted to read medicine bottles for her sick child. "I'm not here to judge," I told them, remembering my own seasons of shame. "I'm here because everyone deserves words." We started with basics. Letters like seeds, words like shoots, sentences like first fruit. I watched their faces change as understanding dawned. That moment when marks became meaning, when the world of written language finally opened its doors. "Teacher, look." Mr. Kamara, 63 and dignified, held up his paper. He'd written his name for the first time. His hands shook with the same wonder I'd once felt detecting life within my womb. I praised him through the tightness in my throat. This was what remained when everything else was stripped away. The ability to guide someone from darkness into light, even when I could barely see the path myself. Slowly, I built routines that held me upright. Morning tea alone, but peaceful. The bush taxi with its familiar cast of market women. Teaching until my voice grew hoarse. Evening walks where I counted steps instead of losses. Small victories. Eating full meals. Sleeping without dreams. laughing at a student's joke without feeling guilty for the sound. 3 months in, Mrs. Achebe called me to her office. "Your students love you. Enrollment has doubled. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." What I was doing was pouring everything I had left into strangers who needed what I could give. If I couldn't nurture my own children, I could nurture mine's. If I couldn't save my marriage, I could save someone from the prison of illiteracy. The pain still lived in me, sharp as glass some days, dull as old thunder others, but purpose grew alongside it, stubborn as weeds through concrete. And just when I thought I had everything figured out, life threw me one last test. The reading club started by accident. Mrs. Mensa lingered after class one evening, tracing words in her notebook like prayers. "I wish I could practice more," she said. "But at home, nobody understands why a grandmother needs letters." "Then practice here," I heard myself say. "Bring others who feel the same." They came. First 3, then 7, then 20. Women who hid their learning from husbands, who thought education would make them proud. Men who were mocked by their children for starting school at 50. We met Thursday evenings, when the world thought we were at market or prayer, and we learned that words could be revolution. Teacher Nalini, they started calling me. Not Auntie Books anymore. That woman had died with her dreams. This was someone new, forged in fire and loss, who understood that sometimes the only way forward was to pull others with you. The mentorship program grew from those evening sessions. I paired new students with those who'd advanced, watching confidence bloom in both teacher and taught. Mr. Kamara, who'd cried over writing his name, now guided others through their first letters with infinite patience. "Like this?" he'd say, his weathered hands steady over trembling ones. Every master was once a disaster. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in a year. The Literacy Center became my second home. First to arrive, last to leave. I reorganized the library, started a donation drive for books, wrote grants until my fingers cramped. When we received funding for new materials, I spent hours choosing texts that would speak to adult learners. Stories of triumph over struggle, practical guides for small business, health information that could save lives. "You're doing too much," Mrs. Achebe warned, finding me asleep at my desk one morning. "This work won't heal what you've lost." But she was wrong. Every student who wrote their first sentence stitched a small seam in my heart. Every grandmother who could finally read to her grandchildren proved that purpose could exist beyond motherhood. Every life I touched me back, a reciprocal healing I hadn't expected. The community began to shift. The whispers about curses faded, replaced by requests for help. Could I teach their housegirl to read? Could I write a letter to the government about the water problem? Could I help organize adult classes in the next village? Yes, I said. Yes, to everything that kept me moving, kept me useful, kept me from drowning in the space between what was and what should have been. One evening, Amara, the little girl who used to climb into my lap at the library, appeared at my classroom door, taller now, serious-faced, holding a university acceptance letter. "I wanted you to know," she said shyly. "You taught me to love books. Now I'm going to study literature." I held that letter like Samuel once held ultrasound pictures, proof that love planted in one season could bloom in another. "I'm proud of you," I managed, and meant it with every broken, healing piece of myself. The anniversary markers came and went. Samuel's death, the baby's due date, the day I lost my home. Each one hurt less sharply, grief settling into my bones like calcium, strengthening rather than breaking. My students became my family. They brought me soup when I was sick, celebrated my small victories, included me in their lives beyond the classroom. When Mrs. Mensa's daughter had a baby. She brought her to show me. "This is teacher Nalini," she said proudly. "She taught me to read so I could teach you." I held that baby carefully, waiting for the familiar stab of loss. It came, but softer now, accompanied by something else. Joy for this new life, this continuing story that wasn't mine but still held beauty. The woman in my mirror looked different now. Thinner, yes. Marked by loss, certainly. But also stronger, steadier, shaped by purpose rather than just pain. I'd built something from nothing, created family from strangers, found meaning in the margins of my shattered plans. But the hardest lesson I learned was not how to rebuild my life, but how to let go of the past, to embrace a future I could no longer control. The award ceremony was held in the capital's Grand Hall, a place I'd only seen in newspapers. National Literacy Champion. They called me, pinning a medal to my dress. Not my only good dress anymore, but one of several I'd bought with my own earned money. 5 years had passed since I'd arrived at the literacy center with nothing but desperation and a teaching certificate. "Your program has transformed over 3,000 lives," the minister said, cameras flashing. "You've shown us that education has no age limit." I smiled for the pictures, thinking of Mr. Kamara, who now ran his own reading circle, of Mrs. Mensa, who'd started a small business keeping proper books, of the teenage mothers who'd returned to school through our evening programs. 3,000 lives, but they'd transformed mine just as much. After the ceremony, I walked through the capital's streets, past the hospital where I'd lost my babies. The building looked smaller now, less like a monument to grief, and more like just another place where life and death danced their eternal dance. I touched my belly, still flat, forever empty, and felt the scar tissue that mapped my history. But scars, I'd learned, were just proof of survival. My phone rang. "Teacher Nalini?" It was Amara, graduating next month. "Will you come? You're the reason I made it this far." "Of course," I promised, adding another date to my calendar that had once held only emptiness. The cemetery was my last stop before returning home. Not to my sister's spare room, I'd left that years ago, but to my own small apartment near the literacy center. A place I'd chosen, paid for, filled with books and plants that thrived under my care. Samuel's grave had settled, grass growing thick over the red earth. The baby's stones stood nearby, no longer raw wounds, but gentle reminders. I sat between them, spreading the newspaper with my photograph, sharing this moment with those who couldn't see it. "I did something today," I told them, voice steady. "Not what we planned, but something good nonetheless." The wind stirred the acacia trees, and for a moment, I could almost hear Samuel's laugh, feel phantom kicks beneath my ribs. But ghosts, I'd learned, were just love with nowhere to go. So I'd poured that love into my students, my community, myself. "I teach fathers to read bedtime stories now," I continued. "I help mothers understand their children's schoolwork. I give people words when they thought they had none." My voice caught. "It's not the family we dreamed of, but it's family still." A young woman approached, carrying a baby. One of my students from the early days, when I could barely teach through my tears. "Teacher," she called out, "I wanted you to meet someone." She placed the baby in my arms without hesitation. "Her name is Nalini, after you. Because you taught me to read, I could get a better job. Because of that job, I could provide for her. She exists because you didn't give up." I held little Nalini, this child who bore my name but not my blood, and felt something shift inside me. Not healing, that had been happening slowly, daily, in increments too small to measure. This was something else. Acceptance, maybe, or recognition that love planted in ashes could still grow gardens. The woman left with promises to bring Nalini to the center when she was older. So you can teach her too, she said, as if it were obvious that I'd still be there, still teaching, still transforming pain into purpose. I stood at the graves one last time, pressing my fingers to each stone. Thank you, I whispered, to Samuel, for loving me when I thought I was too old for love. To my babies, for teaching me that a mother's heart could expand beyond the physical. To my past self, for surviving when survival seemed impossible. The sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of hope. Tomorrow, I had classes to teach, grants to write, lives to change. I had become the woman I never planned to be. Not wife, not mother, but teacher, mentor, survivor. And though I can never undo what's been lost, I've learned that the strength to rise again is within us all. The children's choir filled the community center with voices like scattered seeds on wind. I stood at the podium, my hands steady now, no longer the trembling fingers that once signed my name as widow, as childless, as cursed. 500 faces looked back at me, my students, their families, the village elders who'd once whispered behind their hands. Tonight, they'd gathered to celebrate the Literacy Center's expansion to 3 more villages. Teacher Nalini has given us more than letters, the chief was saying. She's given us dignity, future, hope. Hope. The word sat strange in my mouth, like fruit grown in a foreign season. I smiled as they presented another plaque, as photographers captured this version of me, successful, strong, necessary. But beneath my ribs, that familiar hollow ached, a chamber that would never be filled no matter how many lives I touched. Little Nalini, my namesake, toddled toward the stage, and her mother lifted her up to hand me flowers. The child's weight in my arms was precise and cruel, exactly what my own daughter would have weighed at this age. If. The word that haunted every celebration, every small triumph. Thank you, I managed, setting her down gently, watching her run back to her mother with the careless joy of the deeply loved. After the speeches, after the feast, I walked through the crowd accepting congratulations. My students pressed my hands. Their children called me grandmother. The young women I'd mentored looked at me with something approaching worship. I had become the story they told themselves about resilience, about rising from ashes. But ashes, I'd learned, never fully wash clean. The moon was high when I finally returned to my apartment. Awards lined the shelves where baby clothes should have been. Certificates covered walls that should have held family photos. I'd built a life from the ruins, yes, but some part of me remained in those ruins still, searching through rubble for what could never be recovered. I was preparing tea when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Probably another interview request. Another organization wanting my survivor story packaged neat for donors. Hello? Silence first, then breathing, then a voice that stopped my heart. Madam Victoria? No one had called me that in years. Not since. This is Dr. Njime, from the clinic. I've been trying to find you. There's someone I need you to know about. From the day of your surgery, the day we thought, the line crackled. My knees went weak. What are you saying? Please, can you come? Tomorrow? What I have to tell you, it can't be said over the phone. It's about your pregnancy, about what really happened that day. The phone slipped from my hand, shattering teacups on the tile floor. The voice on the other end told me something I couldn't ignore. A part of me I thought was gone, might still be out there, alive, waiting for me. But how could I face it? After everything I've lost? And what if it's too late? What advice do you have for Victoria? Please like and subscribe. To be continued.